They say justice is a scale, but have we ever asked whose hand holds the beam? The video paused at second 47. No slamming of fists, no rebuttals. Only a blade of pale light slicing through a high courthouse window, landing squarely on the frail frame of a handcuffed black man. Shoulders drawn, spine stretched by years that had carved their way into his bones. He didn't flinch, didn't beg. He simply lifted his eyes toward the screen, not to seek forgiveness, but to pose a question no one had the courage to voice. Do you see me, or just the outline of a verdict you already drew? In the front row, a young officer stared, not at the man, but at the faint glint in the reflection of a jewelry case. A license plate, flickering for zero point 0.6 seconds. Just enough to rewrite the truth of an entire case. And in that exact moment, where tension pressed against every rib and breath thinned to vapor, everyone began to realize some mistakes don't need to be shouted. They echo loudest, in silence. The precinct smelled of damp paper, burnt coffee, and the moldy edges of a roof too proud to admit it had leaked since last spring. It was a scent not carried by air, but by memory. The kind only those who had spent years waiting in rooms too small for dignity could truly recognize. When Malik Carter stepped inside, the badge on his chest still gleamed. His boots were polished with military precision, his stride steady with the kind of calm you only learn when life and death begin to sound the same. And yet, that very composure seemed to make the room colder. Not because of the draft, but because of the eyes. The kind of stares that didn't glare or scowl. They simply ignored. There, at the head of the room, sat Chief Rohr, silver hair trimmed close, chest puffed as if to shield the arrogance that laced his every word. He looked up at Malik like a misplaced file folder, then back down at his paperwork, as if the world only mattered when printed in the right font. This is Carter. Transfer from the military, he announced, the tone closer to a product listing than a welcome. No one clapped, no one stood. A pen tapped rhythmically near the back. 3 soft clicks. That was the only reception he got. Malik nodded. Not too deep, not too brief. Just enough to be respectful without shrinking himself. He had grown used to being measured the moment he entered a room. The Army had taught him to read people through breath patterns, the twitch of a collarbone, the way hands fumbled when saying the word equality, and the silence that always followed when a black man walked into a room full of people who looked nothing like him. Chief Rohr flung a stack of old reports onto the table, the pages rustling like discarded thoughts. Start with filing these. Old incident logs in the back cabinet, and coffee for the 9 a.m. meeting. Black. No sugar. No one asked where he'd served. No one mentioned that Malik once led a tactical intel unit in Kandahar, that he cracked a smuggling ring using nothing but a mismatched font on an invoice and a 3-day radio delay. Here, accolades were as useful as a wool coat in April. Too bulky, too warm, too out of place to keep. His desk, if it could be called that, was wedged between a shrieking printer and the archive room door that slammed every time someone walked by. Taped to the drawer, a crooked post-it with Carter, scrawled in thick black marker. Peeling at the corners, like whoever wrote it didn't expect it to stay long. And then, as he sifted through papers so worn they felt more like regret than record, a yellow folder slid free. No flags, no labels. Just a name, half-faded, George Haynes, missing. Last seen 3 years ago. Case status, unresolved. Officer assigned, blank. No follow-up, no notes, just shaky penmanship, the kind written in a hurry, or meant to disappear. Malik smoothed the page, folded it once, and set it aside, carefully as if it were a question he wasn't ready to ask out loud. He didn't write anything, didn't call attention to it. But in his eyes, there was a glint. The kind of glint you get when you notice something no one else cared to, and refused to let it slide past. In a room where no one invited him in, he made a silent vow, not with words, but with a single deliberate tap of his finger on the aged wood desk. Click. Just loud enough for himself to hear. Malik's chair had no backrest, wedged between a groaning office printer and a storage room door that slammed every time someone yanked it too hard. The wooden seat leaned slightly, not just in posture, but in significance. From that awkward angle, everything inside the station seemed to move past him. People, conversations, directives, like shadows on the edge of a photograph that never quite made it into focus. No one remembered his name. They called him whatever came easy, short, impersonal, and void of the bare minimum that makes someone feel real. "Hey, soldier boy. Coffee's cold. Carter something. You know, that army kid. Send those old files to the military rookie. He's got time." And so, each morning, Malik walked through corridors lined with eyes that were always too busy to see. Not because there was too much work, but because indifference had long become a defense mechanism in places like this. The kind of collective dismissal that strips a man of identity, not with violence, but with the efficiency of calling him like you would an empty chair. That kind of wound doesn't scar the skin. It burrows quietly, deep into the marrow. He sat still, fingertips sorting through aging files. The scent of old ink blending with the faint mildew of paper left too long in a damp drawer. Malik's fingers were thick, calloused by years of rifles and recoil, but his touch was meticulous, almost tender, like someone leafing through the journal of a forgotten city. And in that overlooked corner of the station, a man trained to detect irregularities amid battlefield chaos began to notice fractures in the frame. One night shift report, dated the 17th, was time-stamped 1:15 a.m., but external surveillance had captured the patrol car leaving the lot at 12:54 and not returning until well after 2 a.m. Malik made a small dot in the corner of the page. No red ink, no edits, just a mark his mind could trace back later. A license plate, 8TR622, showed up 3 times across different reports. Same location. Intervals are just under 10 minutes. Far too fast for a single traffic incident. He didn't jump to conclusions. He simply underlined the number with a diagonal stroke, a habit carried over from decoding signal traffic in the field. Flag what feels wrong, even if no one's told you it is. Then came the search warrant, filed as executed, yet nowhere in the digital system. The listed occupant, Thomas Reed. The database, Thomas Red. One missing letter. Maybe a typo. Maybe not. Malik didn't rush to know. He only needed to remember. He didn't report it. Didn't ask questions. Not yet. Instead, he pulled a leather-bound notebook from his chest pocket, the kind with pages yellowing softly at the edges. He flipped it open and wrote, clean and straight. Systems don't collapse with explosions. They fracture under the weight of what we choose to ignore. Each time the printer screeched, each time the storage door slammed like it was trying to drown out the syllables in Malik Carter. He sat still, ears filtering noise, eyes filtering data, and his heart filtering truth. Like a silent gatekeeper of things, this entire station had trained itself not to see. Because sometimes the first thing a righteous man must learn isn't how to speak louder, but how to keep his silence from being swallowed by the meaningless. Mornings in Layfield often began like a news bulletin no one really read. Patrol cars rumbled to life before sunrise. The coffee maker sputtered in sync with the steady rhythm of boots on tile, and pre-filled reports were flipped through with the ease of ritual, as if everything had already been decided before the day even started. But that morning, the air in the briefing room felt different. Tense. So tense that no one had to say a word to know. Something had gone wrong. There'd been a robbery, not a convenience store, not someone's home. Harrington Jewelers, the most upscale jewelry store in town, the kind of place where local politicians ordered their wedding rings and aging legacies picked out heirloom watches. Around 2 a.m., the security system had been disarmed. The glass display cases shattered, not cracked, but splintered like surgical cuts, and an estimated $200,000 in merchandise was gone. All gemstones, several engraved with serial numbers buried deep inside the diamond's heart. No fingerprints, no footprints, no witnesses, and the security footage? Still there. But the camera angle had been conveniently blocked, the image foggy and blurred, like the lens itself had decided it didn't want to see what happened. Chief Rohr slammed the case folder onto the table. A flat, sharp sound that echoed across the aging wood like his frustration wanted its own voice. No forced entry. No sign of tampering with the system. This was professional. Probably someone who knows the job. The room fell into a 3-second silence. Then someone, no one knew who exactly, said half joking, half not, "Maybe it was George Haynes. He lives nearby." In a place like Layfield, a sentence like that didn't need proof. It only needed timing. George Haynes, a black man in his late 60s, living alone in a sagging wood frame house down the last hill of town, where mail got dropped off late and warrants got dropped off first. His record? Thin but spotted. A shoplifting charge from decades ago, one bar fight, and a missed court appearance. Not from defiance, but because he didn't have a ride. His file had just enough ink to make him the perfect sketch. A portrait anyone could finish with whatever color suited the crime. No one asked why George would risk it. No one questioned how a man on a retirement check, barely getting by, could have bypassed a high-end alarm system like a seasoned thief. His background is a conviction waiting to happen, a sergeant muttered, flipping through the initial report. The room chuckled, that light, smug kind of laugh people give when they think justice has been served. But one person didn't laugh. Malik stood at the end of the table, hands still holding the file he'd been assigned, but his eyes had stopped reading words. He was reading the gaps between them. Because at that very moment, the overnight shift's newsreel replayed a snippet of the crime scene on the small digital monitor near the tech console. And in a single frame, one that no one bothered to rewind, Malik saw it. Not a face, not a shadow, but a reflection. Light bouncing off the third glass cabinet from the left, caught by a street lamp at exactly 2:13 a.m., revealing a license plate. Faded, but enough. 622. Malik said nothing. He just sat back down, opened his small notebook, and wrote the number. Hand steady, pen slow, as if every stroke was carving a path he knew he'd have to walk alone. And while the station cheered itself for a quick wrap-up, while George Haynes was cuffed and hauled into holding like an old prop removed from a play that had already decided its cast, Malik Carter stayed quiet, not because he believed George was innocent, but because the glimmer in that reflection, faint, forgotten, almost invisible, still spoke louder than any defense that had ever been offered on the old man's behalf. That night, the air in Layfield carried a different kind of cold, not the kind that came from weather, but from the weight of things unsaid. Malik sat alone in the records room. The amber glow of a desk lamp cast long shadows across his cheekbones, taut with tension. The scent in the room was thick, a blend of aging paper and a faint trace of scorched plastic from the overworked printer, dense enough to feel like the walls themselves were trying to hold in a secret. On the flickering screen of an old computer, a video played, one Malik had painstakingly restored from a backup drive, tucked far enough away that few even knew it existed. It wasn't part of the official system. It wasn't supposed to be found. It was surveillance footage from the back entrance of Harrington Jewelers. Length, 6 minutes, 14 seconds. The footage listed in the case file, 4 minutes and 2 seconds. He rewound, watched, paused, then again. At second 253, a figure appeared, blurred, face obscured, but the gait, there was something unsettlingly familiar about the way he moved, like a memory trying to take shape. And right at that moment, the audio cut out. The waveform on the screen turned into a perfect, silent line. No static, no wind, no ambient noise, just nothing. Too clean to be accidental. Malik's jaw clenched. He pulled the official report. On the last page, scribbled in blue ink at the margin, was a note. Audio unclear, unusable as evidence. Innocent enough. Unless, of course, you'd worked in military intelligence like Malik had, and learned that sometimes the most lethal way to bury the truth is to erase its sound. He flipped through his notes. The license plate, 8TR622, when cross-checked, led to a black sedan registered under the name Calder Row. Nothing remarkable, until he searched the internal personnel registry, a confidential database for former officers and affiliated law enforcement. Calder Row, former homicide unit, arrested in 2013 for trafficking seized evidence, and right beneath the entry, bailed out by Roar Robert L. The room around him fell still, even though he was the only one in it. There was no mistaking it. Not a common name, not a coincidence. It was Chief Roar, the same man who once told his entire squad, "Whether a man's clean or dirty depends on who you believe, not what he's done." Malik closed his eyes, drew in a breath. He wasn't the kind of man who shook easily. But for the first time in years, the numbers, the footage, the handwriting, and his own buried memories converged into something he couldn't swallow down. The truth was too big to carry alone. The next morning, after roll call dispersed, Malik walked up to the front of the operations table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't hold a press conference. He placed a folded note on Chief Roar's desk, not with defiance, but with clarity. "Sir, I just ask that you read this," he said. His tone was even, but his eyes, they searched for a line, for the last place where this conversation could still be saved. Roar frowned before he even opened the note, looked at Malik, and for the first time didn't look past him. "What are you doing, Carter?" he asked. The edge in his voice no longer masked behind authority, but behind fear. "Just something I thought needed reviewing before the Haynes file gets sent to the DA's office." Roar barked a laugh, dry, joyless. "Carter, who the hell do you think you are? You're digging yourself a hole, and trust me, no one's climbing down to pull you out." Malik didn't flinch. He nodded once, not in agreement, but in recognition, then turned, walked out, coffee in hand, just like every other day. But this time his boots echoed down the hallway, steady, firm. Like even the floor beneath him had started to realize something had shifted. Capitol Hill isn't entirely dark at night. A few windows still flicker with light, not fluorescent, but determined. The kind of glow kept alive by those who don't wait for dawn to do what must be done. On the fourth floor of the East Wing, Jasmine Crockett sat at her desk, still in her chair long after the building should have emptied. Stacks of civil rights documents rose around her like quiet battlements. Red-marked, numbered, lined with sticky notes, as if justice itself could be itemized by case file. Outside, on the small reception table in the hallway, someone had left an envelope. No stamp, no seal, no sender. Only a single line on the front, written in clean black ink, slightly slanted to the left. "For the one brave enough not to look away." Jasmine paused, just long enough to register the weight of silence. Then she tore the flap open, quietly. Inside was a neatly ordered bundle of documents, numbered by hand. Each page a slice of something meant to stay buried. George Haynes. Scene photos. A license plate half captured in the fractured reflection of a jewelry case. Scrawled memos in pencil, sharp as razors pressed between the layers of official print. On the last page, centered and alone, was a single sentence. "I'm not sure I have the power, but I'm sure I can't stay silent." Jasmine didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the line. Not because it shocked her, but because it felt familiar. Not the handwriting, the helplessness. That buried kind of helplessness she had carried like an invisible scar since her first months in Congress. She had once sat on a review panel. Young, idealistic, outnumbered. It was a police brutality case. The key evidence, a blurry recording, too muffled to hold up. The officer in question, related to a state commissioner, the victim, an elderly black man with no surviving family. Jasmine had remained silent, not because she agreed, but because she was alone. The kind of alone where your title doesn't shield you, where you haven't yet earned the power to stand, and no one stands behind you if you do. She closed her eyes for a moment, then slowly she opened the bottom drawer, the one rarely touched, and pulled out an envelope, yellowed at the edges. It was a draft, a letter she had written in her first year, a detailed report protesting how a federal case had been handled. She'd never sent it. It had no address, no recipient, and maybe no one who would have read past the second page. She placed the old letter beside the file Malik had sent, lined it up precisely, as if connecting two ends of a thread that had been severed long ago. No music, no spotlight, no witnesses. But something in her shifted, not emotion, conviction. She didn't turn on the overhead lights. She simply lifted the phone on her desk and dialed the Civil Rights Committee office. Her voice, calm and plain, left a message. No polish, no politics. I need to reopen a case. I think we may have seen the wrong man. Rumors move faster than memos. At exactly 9 a.m., inside the Layfield Police Department, a staff meeting was suddenly called. No advance notice, no agenda, just one vague instruction posted by the copier. Full attendance required. In the briefing room, no one said much, but glances darted across the room like silent signals. Enough to tell everyone the same thing. Something big had just walked through the door. And at 9:07 sharp, Jasmine Crockett entered. She wasn't wearing the bold red suit the public had seen her in at congressional hearings. Today she came in deep navy, sleeves rolled just slightly, glasses thin-framed, hair pulled back, not dressed to command, dressed to dissect. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice soft, but without room for misinterpretation. "I'm here as a federal civil rights auditor. I have a few questions regarding the Harrington case." The temperature in the room dipped, not literally, but perceptibly. Chief Rohr adjusted his sleeve, cleared his throat, and offered a tight-lipped smile. "Of course, Ms. Crockett. I believe we've submitted all necessary documentation to the liaison office." "Correct," Jasmine cut in smoothly. "Which is why I'm here. I'd like to review the original surveillance footage from the crime scene, not the compressed version currently stored in the incident database." Rohr blinked. His smile stayed, but part of his voice vanished behind it. "I'm afraid the original was overwritten about 3 weeks ago. We only have the compressed file, as you've seen." Jasmine didn't respond right away. She twirled a metal pen slowly between her fingers, then locked eyes with Rohr. Not with suspicion, but with the calm certainty of someone who already knows the answer, and is simply giving you one last chance not to lie. From the far end of the room, Malik Carter tightened his grip on his notebook. His palms were damp, not with fear, but with the pulse of something rising in him, a quiet thrum, telling him that everything he had written, gathered, kept, might finally be stepping into the light. The room stayed silent. Low murmurs buzzed among officers, unsure of what was happening. Someone whispered, "What's this about?" Another replied, "Heard something was off with the George case." And then Malik stood. He didn't ask for permission, didn't wait to be called. He walked forward, slow and deliberate, and pulled from his folder a USB drive wrapped in a clear plastic sleeve, placing it gently on the table in front of Jasmine. "Backup copy. From an offline drive." His voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like a nail into wood that was already starting to splinter. Jasmine didn't flinch. She accepted the USB with both hands, not just as evidence, but as something far rarer, a second chance at truth. Chief Rohr shifted in his chair. His shoulders shrank inward. Hands disappeared into his sleeves. Lieutenant Shea, quiet, reserved, always observing, leaned forward, and for the first time he noticed something in Rohr's eyes begin to crack. Not anger, not control, fear. The real kind. The kind that visits men when they realize the bridge they've been walking across has been rotting from beneath their feet. No one shouted. No one pounded fists. But could you feel it? That stillness of a man who knows he's about to be exposed, not by accusation, but by the quiet, trembling gaze of someone who's finally stopped being afraid of him. Monday morning, 8:30 a.m., federal hearing room. In the front row sat a black man, silver-haired, his face lined not with age alone, but with time itself, like it had been carved slowly by years he never asked to carry. George Haynes sat with no cuffs, no shackles, just his hands resting in his lap, folded like they'd forgotten where they belonged. Behind the soundproof glass, the murmur of spectators rippled low and constant. Judgment mostly, disguised as whispers. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett stood. She didn't lead with a speech. No titles, no fire. Just a small USB drive, placed on the table, then slid into the reader. The screen behind her blinked to life. First frame, grainy footage. Timestamp, 2:13:47. A jewelry case inside Harrington Jewelers, catching the reflection of a street lamp, just enough to mark the time. Second frame, slow zoom. A license plate, 8TR622. Third frame, vehicle registration, name listed, Calder Rowe, a former officer dismissed for evidence tampering. Fourth frame, a pawn shop record from a neighboring town. Diamond bracelet, serial number matching the stolen piece from Harrington. Signed in, C. Rowe. Final frame, audio only. A man's voice. Flat, too steady. George was the cleanest choice for a decoy. No one questions an old black man with nothing. They recognize the face and fill in the rest. The voice didn't need confirmation. Everyone in the room knew it. Roar. Chief Roar. He sat just below the screen, sleeves rolled tight over a crisp white shirt that now looked 2 sizes too small for the shame it couldn't cover. He didn't yell, didn't object. He just looked down, not with guilt, but with the surrender of someone who realized they'd finally been seen for exactly who they were. A chair creaked. A few people in the audience, war veterans, caseworkers, elderly women in thick-knit sweaters, began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the kind of tears reserved for truths that had always been there, just waiting for someone to say them out loud. And then from the witness box, a sound broke the silence. George cried, no sobs, no visible tears, just a quiet collapse of his shoulders, as if every tendon, every nerve he'd braced for decades had just found permission to finally tremble. Jasmine looked at him, not at the judge, not at the cameras, just at him and maybe at the younger version of herself still sitting quietly somewhere in the past. I'm not here to defend Mr. Haynes, she said gently. I'm here to say, I believe him. A simple sentence. But in that courtroom, it was a flame set down in the middle of a winter that had lasted far too long. The judge tapped his gavel dryly. Motion granted. Independent review panel to be assembled. All charges to be reevaluated. No applause. No celebration. But something in the room had shifted. A gray-haired woman placed her trembling hand on George's shoulder as he was helped out. Not to guide him, but to anchor him, to say, you are not alone anymore. A young officer in the back removed his earpiece, gripping his notebook like a lifeline. And for the first time in a long time, among people who had forgotten what it felt like to be heard, there was a silence, not of resignation, but of compassion, finally stirring awake. The jail doors opened just after dawn. So early the sunlight hadn't yet stretched far enough to reach the threshold. On the cold cement floor, a pair of worn shoes shuffled forward, quieter than breath. George Haynes stood there. No handcuffs, no guards, no slip of guilt paper clipped to his chest. Just a plain envelope from the court. Inside one line. Charges temporarily suspended pending further investigation. But to George, it read louder than any declaration of innocence. He walked slowly, not because his legs were weak, but because he was reacquainting himself with what it felt like to be human. That first step past the threshold wasn't just across concrete. It was over years of being told he didn't count. His eyes, red-rimmed but wide open, didn't scan the horizon for freedom. They looked forward, as if trying to confirm that the world was still there, and that he was still allowed to see it. On the bottom step, Malik Carter waited. Dark coat, black coffee in hand, no clipboard, no ceremony, just presence. When George reached him, Malik didn't speak. He simply extended the coffee, hands steady, eyes clear. It wasn't a gift. It was a gesture, a ritual, slow and quiet, like the two of them were burying something, together. George took it. Their hands touched for a second. Not long, not staged. But in that second, something passed between them, a kind of knowing, the kind that lives between people who have both been crushed by a system, yet still managed to walk out of it upright. That afternoon at Layfield Station, a new notice appeared on the staff bulletin board. Effective next week, Officer Malik Carter reassigned from administrative duty. Lead investigator on case 097812, the Jefferson file. Status, cold case, unresolved. The Jefferson case was one of the oldest on record. A missing girl, no clear leads, corruption suspected in the original investigation, so much so that no one had dared reopen it. Until now. When Malik entered the station later that day, the atmosphere had changed. Gone were the smirks, the dismissive glances. No more muttered, "Carter whatever," or "that army kid." Instead, they stood, one by one. Not because anyone told them to, not for rank, not for show. They stood because their bodies remembered what their minds had tried to forget. When integrity walks into a room, you either bow your head or you get up. Malik walked forward, not looking left or right, but with each step it felt like the room unfolded behind him like a dusted-off map, finally pointing back to something right. At the far end of the hallway, a veteran officer whispered to the man beside him. He didn't crack Harrington to make a name. He did it because he couldn't live with how wrong it was. In politics, the most important things rarely come through the front door. They don't arrive with uniformed couriers, stamped seals, or gold-ink signatures. They arrive quietly, tucked inside handwritten letters, scrawled on notepads, and sometimes in objects no one ever expected would be kept. On Thursday afternoon, Malik returned to his desk. It was clean. He'd wiped it down himself that morning, which made the object sitting there feel all the more deliberate. A small glass frame, light oak, edges beveled smooth. Not flashy, but clearly not left there by accident. Inside, pressed and preserved under the glass, was a folded slip of paper, the pencil lines still sharp, deliberate, unshaking. "I'm not sure I have the power, but I'm sure I can't stay silent." Just beneath it, a thin tag, smaller than the palm of a hand, bore a line in bold type. "Sometimes the truth needs to be sent before we're ready to sign our names." J.C. Malik stood still. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. But if you look closely, you'd notice his hand resting gently against the frame. Not pressing, but as if listening for a heartbeat that had once stopped, and now quietly pulsed again. He didn't need to know who sent it. Didn't need a thank you. Recognition doesn't always arrive in applause. Sometimes it arrives in the way someone chooses to keep what they could have thrown away. He placed the frame on the right side of his desk, tilted exactly 15 degrees, the same way he used to angle battlefield maps for quick reference. Beside it, a case file lay open. Jefferson 097812. An old missing persons case, shelved for 4 years under a blanket of dust and departmental inertia. He hadn't turned the page yet, but his pen was already out of his breast pocket. Ready? No one walked in. No one called his name. There were no hurried footsteps down the hall. But somehow the room had changed. Its color, its weight, the way the light touched the objects on his desk, as if the presence of one forgotten page had quietly shifted how everything else now chose to be seen. Layfield Elementary sat just 2 blocks from the old police station, nestled beneath a canopy of oak trees that were already shedding their leaves for winter. It was a late autumn morning, the kind where the wind carried the scent of new books and damp soil. In classroom 3, the teacher stood at the board and asked the familiar question, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Hands shot up. Doctor, football player, bridge engineer, a mom like mine. Then from the desk by the window, a black boy in a slightly oversized uniform raised his hand. He didn't speak right away. He just looked straight ahead, not timid, not loud, and said in a steady, sure voice, "I want to be a police officer." The room fell silent for a beat. A few students turned to look. The teacher walked over gently, smiling. "Why that choice?" she asked. The boy tilted his head. "Because my dad told me there was a man named Malik Carter. He didn't shout, didn't have anyone backing him, but he saved someone the whole town had already given up on." The teacher didn't say anything more. She just nodded. Somewhere outside town, a local radio broadcast had just begun. The speaker's voice was rough, unpolished. The kind of voice not used to microphones, but heavy with truth. "My name is George Haynes. I'm not a criminal. I'm someone who survived, because one man refused to give up." It wasn't a thank you. It was a statement, a quiet flag planted in the soil of truth. And for anyone who had ever doubted the value of quiet strength, of someone who simply chose to do the right thing, there was no room left for doubt anymore. That afternoon, golden sunlight poured like honey across the brick steps of Layfield Police Station. Malik Carter walked up to them, slowly, steadily, in his hands the Jefferson case file. On his chest, a badge that caught the light, not in a blinding flash, but like a steady oil lamp burning quietly with perseverance, not noise. No one whispered behind his back anymore. No more sidelong glances. And most importantly, no shadows followed him through the door.